kind of pointing back to God's law. They were pointing back to God's word and reminding Samson not only that he's set apart as a Nazirite. It's one of the things we saw last week, that he had this special calling placed on his life from the time he was in his mother's womb, and it was to last the duration of his lifetime until the day he died. And so as a Nazirite, he was set apart to God. And there were 3 things he was supposed to do as a Nazirite, or not do. He wasn't supposed to have any strong drink. So he was supposed to avoid wine. He was supposed to avoid beer. He was supposed to avoid all strong drinks. He was supposed to avoid the vineyards, period. He couldn't even eat a grape. Secondly, he was supposed to avoid death, right? Any carcasses, and anybody, like, while you are upholding this vow, you could not come in contact with death. So even if, say, your parents had passed away, you couldn't participate as a pallbearer for your parents' casket. You were supposed to avoid death. You couldn't touch death. And then third, he wasn't supposed to cut his hair at all. And one of the things that we'll notice through Samson's life is that over time, he completely broke all 3 of those aspects of a Nazirite vow, where outwardly he was showing that he's set apart to God. Well, in this case, even though his parents were trying to point him back to reason, they were trying to point him back to God's word, they were trying to point him back to God's law, they were trying to point him back to the covenant that God established with their people as a set-apart people. So again, it's not just that Samson is a set-apart dude, it's also that they are a set-apart people. And the parents said, do you really want a woman from the uncircumcised people? They're not the people of God. They're not God's chosen people. It'd be so much better for you, son, if you don't go that route. It'd be a bad idea to intermarry, not just with the fact that they're not part of God's people, but they're actually our oppressors. Well, Samson wouldn't listen to the voice of reason. He wouldn't listen to wisdom. And like an iPad kid who throws a tantrum if he doesn't get his iPad right away, he starts telling his parents, get her for me. Why? Well, because she's right in my eyes. And that's exactly what would happen. Verses 5 through 9 of our text today show us what happened as the entire family, dad, mom, and Samson, as they all went down to Timnah to meet this young woman, to meet her family, and to arrange the wedding. Along the way, somehow Samson maybe got separated from his parents. I don't know exactly what that looked like. The text does not tell us what happened and why his parents didn't see the young lion that attacked Samson, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, and he killed that lion. He tore the lion in 2. Like, in other words, he came in contact with death, something he wasn't supposed to do. So already we see him breaking an aspect of the Nazirite vow. And then afterwards, on the way back, as he's walking by where that carcass was laying, and I don't know how many days passed or how much time had passed, but a swarm of bees had started a honeycomb apparently inside or from within of the lion's carcass. And so he sees it, he likes it, he craves it, and he sticks his hand inside, eats it, enjoys it, and then he offers it to his parents without them knowing where the honey had come from. Doesn't it remind you of a garden scene? A little garden called Eden, when someone offered something that was prohibited to somebody else. He's repeating the same thing. It was prohibited to him, and yet he saw what he liked, or he liked what he saw. He craved that honey, and he ate it nonetheless. All of that happened as the wedding was being arranged. Well, then, in verses 10 through 18, we see what happened during the actual wedding feast. It was a 7-day party, a 7-day wedding feast that back then, it would have involved a whole lot of drinking, guys. A whole lot of drinking. And I'm pretty sure that Samson was at the very least tipsy, if not drunk, when he decided to place a bet. Again, a lack of wisdom here on Samson's part. And this is what you notice moment after moment in chapter 14, and it's going to continue in chapter 15. He has these impulses that lead him to make some unwise choices. And again, it all started with his desire to marry this one woman. But now we're at the actual wedding party, the 7-day wedding feast. And he decides to place a wager. And he forms this riddle surrounding the entire event that had to do with the lion that he killed and the honey that he ate out of that lion. And of course, this was a sure win for Samson because only he knew the actual answer. But the Philistine men, the 30 men that had become part of that, like I guess you can say the wedding party, right? It was like if you've ever been to a Hispanic quince años party, where it's kind of like the Hispanic version of a Sweet 16 when a young woman turns 15. And she has this entire entourage of guys that are called chambelanes and other ladies that are called damas or dames. And it's just part of the party, right? So she walks in, she's in her white dress as part of her Sweet 15 in Hispanic culture, but she has an entire party that does the entrance with her and is maybe standing at the front of the church when a ceremony is being done. The same thing that we do in weddings today. Well, here's a bridal party or a wedding party that's accompanying them, and it's 30 men. This must have been a cultural practice that they had, that they get 30 young men from the town to be a part of this wedding party. And he lays out the riddle to them in the form of a bet. He's like, guys, if you can get this, then I'll give you 30 pieces of clothing is what I'll owe you. But if you can't get it, then you owe me 30 pieces of garments. And of course, they can't get the answer. And eventually, on day 4, the Philistine men coerce Samson's bride to get the answer from Samson, but they do it with death threats. So it's like she didn't even have a choice. Do you notice that? So she presses Samson, and eventually she's able to retrieve the answer, and the 30 men are able to give Samson the right answer because she shares the right answer with them. And he gets furious. Verses 19 and 20 tell us the outcome. Hello, hello, hello. All right, much better. Thank you. It was a battery issue. So just notice with me that normally the judges, they would deliver God's people, the Israelites, in militaristic fashion. They would go to battles and in that way deliver God's people. But in this case, as Samson goes on in his rage affair, he kills 30 Philistine men to be able to pay his debt, to be able to pay his end of the bet. And so he kills these 30 men to be able to deliver the 30 pieces of garments and clothes that he owed the young men from his wedding feast, his wedding party. but it wasn't a military campaign. In other words, this was Samson committing murder. I don't know about you, but I look at this and I'm like, God, you're using a guy that's impulsive. You're using a guy that's filled with like road rage, except it's not road rage. It's just like life rage, right? Like this is a hothead. He murders 30 guys. It's not even a military battle. And he doesn't even do it to deliver God's people. He does it for himself because he owes a bet. So it seems all wrong. And yet God uses that anyways. God uses Samson's evil, you could put it that way, for his own good purposes. And I'm like, God, really? You're going to use a guy like this? Like, how messed up is Samson? How impulsive is he? How murderous is he? And yet you use him? I can't explain it. But we see all the heartache. Right? We see him burning with anger. We see him paying his debt. We see him leaving his bride that he just married, returning to his father's house, not something he was supposed to do. He was a married man now. He's supposed to have his own home with his new bride. He leaves her there in Timnah, goes back to his father's house, and abandons his wife. And at the end of the day, his bride's dad, and something that we're going to see in the opening verses next week in chapter 15, his bride's father really thought that Samson had deserted her, right? It would have been a form of a divorce. He thought he hated her. He thought he deserted her. So he was like, well, this can't be. Like, I've got to give her away to another man. And that's exactly what happens. He loses face. He loses his bride. He brings all kinds of heartache upon himself and the people around him. And this leads us to one big lesson today. Here's your first fill in the blank. Sometimes an unwise choice can lead to wave after wave of heartache. Sometimes one unwise choice, it's the ripple effect. Sometimes one unwise choice can lead to wave after wave of heartache. If only Samson didn't demand to marry that Philistine woman, as pretty as she was, as beautiful as she was, but he did. And it brought an entire series of heartache after heartache. What do we learn from this for our own here and now today? Because you're probably not going away to some far-off land to find someone from a far-off land to marry nowadays. So how do we apply this to our own here and now? Well, I think that if we look at this from the perspective of wisdom, it seems to be something that Samson lacked. And I think there's some lessons here for our own application of wisdom today. And wisdom is something we all need. Sometimes something that we lack. Definitely something that we all need. And usually, if we practice wisdom, if we put wisdom into action, it'll save us from a whole lot of heartache. Not a foolproof plan. Sometimes heartache happens just because heartache happens. But if you want to have a little less heartache in life, guys, there's some simple things that we can do in the pursuit of wisdom. Number one, ask for counsel and listen. Ask for wise counsel and actually listen. You know, in Samson's case, he didn't even have to ask. Wise counsel was offered to him by his parents. We saw that in the opening verses as his parents were trying to tell him, son, this is a bad idea. Do you really want to do this? And he just didn't want to listen. Counsel was given. He chose to ignore it. You know, I'm reminded of the writer of Proverbs in the opening chapter, verses 8 and 9 of Proverbs chapter 1. Proverbs, of course, is a book in the Bible where we glean all kinds of wisdom. And in Proverbs 1, verses 8 through 9, the writer of Proverbs writes, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. In other words, the wisdom that your parents can give you, they're a good thing. All right, so here's something that's great to put into practice. If your parents are still with you, if you have the blessing of your parents still being with you and around here, anytime you come around to a choice to make, it would be a great thing if you picked up the phone and you asked them for their input. And if you asked them, hey, mom, hey, dad, what would you do in my shoes? This is the choice I have in front of me. What would you do? And I know not all of us have a great relationship with our parents, but if you do, you should ask your parents why. Because they've been around the block a few more times than we have. And chances are that they've been in your shoes. And maybe they've made the mistakes that you don't want to make, and they have some wise counsel to share with you. Look, young people in our audience, if you're in middle school, if you're in high school, don't forsake what your parents, the wisdom your parents have to offer you. Sometimes when we're young, and I remember being there, sometimes when we're young, we're like, oh, mom, come on, give me a break. Have you been there? I know I used to do it. But the reality is, our parents usually know better than we do, and it would be wise of us to listen to their counsel and to pay attention. Now, I remember just this week, in terms of asking for counsel, because it's not just about asking our parents. You also put this into practice by asking your spouse, asking a godly person in your life, asking a good friend who actually has your best interest in view, not a friend that's just going to tell you what you want to hear. Just this week alone, at the end of the week, of course, as I started getting sick, my wife was wisely telling me, you know what, Marttell, you should probably ask one of the guys if they can fill in and preach for you. I was a mess on Friday and Saturday, guys. I was a mess. I couldn't get out of bed. I was coughing up a storm. Body aches all over. I felt like I was in a car accident, and I've been there, so I know what a car accident feels like. I was a mess. And Saturday afternoon rolls along, and my wife is telling me, you should probably ask somebody to fill in and somebody to preach in your place tomorrow. And I was like, oh, no, it's too late to ask somebody. I'm just going to power through. I kind of wish I would have listened to her, because you wouldn't need to listen to me coughing while I'm speaking today. Now, thankfully, God, in His grace, He uses my folly anyways, and He allowed me to turn a corner overnight last night, and I started feeling a little better around midnight. I was finally able to get some sleep. But guys, just how simple it is to get some godly counsel, but then actually listening to it. Proverbs 12:15 tells us the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Ask for advice. Ask for counsel. In Proverbs, we even see wisdom applied to war language. Over in Proverbs 11:14, we're told, for lack of guidance, a nation falls militaristically. For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors. Right? A wise general has advisors around him. A wise president has counselors around him. Proverbs 20:18, plans are established by seeking advice. So if you wage war, obtain guidance. Right? All over the book of Proverbs, you see proverb after proverb that tells us that one of the best ways to obtain wisdom is by asking for counsel, asking for advice, and hopefully you're asking for godly advice. Again, it could be from your parents, it could be from your grandparents, it could be from your spouse, it could be from an aged saint in your church. Someone who's already been there, done that, and can impart some wisdom your way. Young people in our audience today, look around you. Our church is an intergenerational church. Not every church is intergenerational. We have the blessing of being an intergenerational church. Young people, turn to those around you who have the gray hairs, because they can give you some wisdom that you're going to need in life. Don't forsake the wisdom that members, the gray-haired members, can share with you simply because they've already been there, done that, and can save you from the same heartache maybe they experienced in a similar situation you're facing. The point is, seek wise counsel and listen to it. Sometimes we might, I say this, actually listen to it, because sometimes we go through the motion of seeking counsel. But have you ever been there where like you ask for advice, but your choice is really already made up? And you're just kind of going through the motion of seeking for counsel. So we'll ask for counsel, but we're really not listening to the advice that we're given. That can be just as dangerous as not asking for counsel at all. Further pitfalls to avoid in the case of asking for counsel on the receiving end of counsel and advice. Be on guard against the temptation to gossip when you're asking for counsel. Be on guard against the temptation to gossip. Sometimes we're asking for advice, we're asking for counsel in something that has to do in a relationship issue. And so we'll go to someone asking for advice, and that can become a platform for gossip. All in the name of, I'm just trying to seek advice. Be careful. Know the difference between gossip and actually asking for counsel. Sometimes it's better to not even name names, not even explain the details in your situation. And sometimes it's best to just ask for the counsel in the relational issue where you have to make a decision or you're looking for a way to mend the relationship. And so you're asking for wisdom, you're asking for counsel. Sometimes it's better to not even name the names and just ask for the counsel. Also, be on guard against the temptation to just receive sympathy. Sometimes we'll go into a conversation where we're asking for counsel, but have you ever met someone who's always a victim? Have you ever met someone who's always the victim? And really all they're looking for is sympathy. Like, oh no, I'm so sorry that happened to you again. Oh man, be on guard, guys. If you're asking for counsel, be on guard against the temptation to just receive sympathy or affirmation. If you're looking for counsel, seek the actual counsel. Third, be on guard against the temptation to only seek counsel from your best friends, from your peers. Because a lot of times, your closest friends, your peers, they're not going to be honest with you. They're only going to tell you what you want to hear. Hence the value in an intergenerational church where you could ask counsel from others who aren't your peers. Oftentimes, the best counsel is from non-peers, from those who are older than you. And then on the giving end, if you're being asked for counsel, wait. Wait till you're asked for advice. This is a good thing to put into practice. Sometimes we want to give advice when we're not even asked for advice. It's a good practice to just wait till you're asked for advice. Also, know the difference between someone who's just venting and someone who's really looking for your advice. I've learned this in my own marriage where sometimes my wife comes to me, and she's laughing right now, but sometimes my wife approaches me and she's like telling me about something in her day. Have you been there, husbands? And your wife is telling you something about her day and you're ready to give the solution. Oh, here's the counsel, baby girl. Here's my advice, my sweetheart. Here's my godly answer for you, my dear wife, my amor. And then she's like, why are you giving me solutions? I wasn't looking for that. I was just looking to vent. Know the difference between someone who's just looking to vent and someone who's actually looking for counsel. if you're on the giving end. But all this to say that it is very good if you want to avoid heartache, seek counsel, seek godly advice, and listen to it. Number 2, slow down. Slow down. Pump your brakes. Slow down. Samson had a tendency to rush into everything. Oh, he's probably one of the most impulsive characters we meet. One of the most impulsive historical characters we meet in the Bible. I mean, talk about impulsive. And if you think you're impulsive, like, oh, I just saw a puppy at the store, I'm going to buy a puppy. Have you been there? We've been there. We walked around, like, I kid you not, guys. There was a point in our lives early on in our marriage that we went to the shelter and we saw a little miniature pinscher and we were like, ah. And we adopted that little miniature pinscher right on the spot. And then like a few months later, we were like, oh, our little miniature pinscher needs a buddy. So then we found on Craigslist another miniature pinscher to adopt. Well, I guess that's not the right term nowadays. Like rehome. And you pay a rehoming fee. You're actually purchasing a dog, guys. Anyways, all that to say, like, I've been there. We've been there. Where it's like you see something, you don't slow down, you make the immediate choice, and it's like, boom. And then afterwards, we're like, oh, man, the commitment we put ourselves into. Not that we didn't love our dogs. We love our dogs, but they are a commitment. Slow down. Samson had a tendency to rush into everything. Don't be like Samson. Give yourself. This is something we learn through life experience. Young people, here's a free point of advice. Give yourself the 48-hour rule. I'm starting to get some gray hairs. I'm not as gray-haired as others, so I don't have a lot of wisdom to impart. But here's some wisdom I have learned through life experience. Slow down when you're going through decisions. And a great thing I've picked up in life is the 48-hour rule. I learned the 48-hour rule back when I was coaching soccer. And one of the things that one of the other coaches imparted on me, because in the world of competitive soccer, like in the world of really any competitive sport, parents can be atrocious. And the coaches can get like, oh man, you can be hounded by parents. You make a decision in a game, you bench their kid, you don't start their kid, and it's like, oh, why aren't you starting my kid? Like, why'd you make this decision? Why'd you make that decision? And parents will just give you a hard time. Well, this one coach that I was friends with told me the best thing I've put into practice is the 48-hour rule. When parents attack me on a Saturday because I did something in the game that they didn't like, because I benched their kid or I didn't start their kid or whatever decision that was made, and the parents became furious, I've made a choice to not respond until 48 hours later. Because if I respond right away, I'm going to respond in the heat of the moment, and I'm just going to make things worse. Well, I've taken that advice from another older coach who imparted that advice to me, and I've just applied it to all of life. The 48-hour rule. Just giving yourself a chance to slow down and pray through things when you have a choice in front of you. Proverbs 21:5 says, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste, right? Rushing things, as surely as haste leads to poverty. Oh, how much heartache we could avoid if we just slow down and not rush into something, especially the big decisions. Like maybe you don't want to do a wedding in Vegas with somebody that you just met a weekend ago. Or like maybe you want to slow down and get to know the person first. And as you slow down, of course, pray. Philippians 4:6 says it this way: in every situation, right? Even when you have a life decision to make, in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So slow down. and pray through it. As you're getting counsel, as you're getting advice, you're slowing down and you're praying and you're asking God for his wisdom, his clarity, his guidance. Number 3, be careful to believe what your desires and cravings tell you. Be very careful to believe what your heart tells you. Because wasn't this Samson's biggest weakness? As you look at his life, as you look at how he operated, his biggest weakness was his own heart. He operated from the arena of his heart-level emotions and feelings and desires. And it led to tons of heartache for him and all the others around him. And he wouldn't listen to reason. He operated from here and never listened to up here. And the Bible warns us to be careful about this. Jeremiah 17:9, a lot of you know this one. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things. So be careful with your heart-level desires and feelings and emotions and cravings. The Apostle John referred to it as the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes in 1 John 2:16, as he talks about the things we desire in this world. Because what we desire isn't always good. Oh, we can have some good desires, don't get me wrong. We can have some great desires, some godly desires, but more often than not, what we crave, what we desire in our hearts has a tendency to cause us some heartache. So be careful to believe those cravings and desires when they whisper, take me, I'm good for you. Oh, you're going to enjoy me. Be careful. And I'm telling you right now, if you listen to that, it's usually a lie, and it's usually going to bring you some heartache. Because all too often, they can lead to things like financial crises. They can lead to relational crises. They could even lead to health crises if we listen to what the craving or the desire is whispering into our ears. Let's be careful. Well, don't be hard on yourself. We've all regretted a choice here and there, haven't we? We all have. But don't be down on yourself. See, this is where now we got to turn to grace. Because some of us, man, you remember a bad choice from 10 years ago, or you're living through a not so wise choice right now, and you're in the thick of it right now. And we need some grace for ourselves and for our hearts. Here's what we want to end our time with today, and your last fill in the blank. We all have inner struggles. Like, we all have desires. We all have cravings. We all have inner struggles. But even then, God catches us up in his great purposes. Isn't that what happened in Samson's life? And I really don't know how to explain it apart from God's mercy, apart from God's grace. But I want to take you right back to verse 4. There's this parenthetical explanation as Samson was demanding to marry the woman that he found to be insanely attractive in his own eyes, the woman that he desired. His parents are trying to be the voice of reason in his life. He's rejecting all of that. But then verse 4, we get this parenthetical explanation. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. This is I really don't have an explanation. I really don't know how to explain it. Part of me is like, wow, God, apart from God's grace. But I want to take you right back to verse 4. Hebrews, over in the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11 says that this was a man of faith. Like Samson was a man of faith. Samson was a saint. But I see Samson way more as a sinner than a saint. How about you? I see Samson way more as a person who messed up over and over again, made the wrong choices over and over again, was led by his heart, by his lustful heart, over and over and over again. He was a hothead. He desired vengeance. He was murderous. And I'm like, really, Hebrews chapter 11? This was a man of faith? What? I don't get it, God. But isn't he a snapshot of the entire nation of Israel who wasn't faithful to God, and yet God was gracious to the entire nation anyways. And God is gracious to him anyways. Oh, he still gets the heartache, right? He still gets the consequences for his decisions. But our merciful God still blesses him, still uses him, still bestows his Spirit upon him and uses him for his great purposes. And that's when I see myself in him. It's like, man, how many times have I messed up? How many times have I not followed God? How many times have I followed the lust of my own eyes and the lust of my own flesh, as John puts it? No, yeah, that's me. I'm Samson. And yet God gives me his grace nonetheless. How many times have I made the wrong decision? How many times have I hurt someone else around me all because of something I desired? How many times have I been ungracious? How many times have I been unkind? And yet God still gives me his kindness. I look at verse 4 and I'm like, wow, God, you really are great. I mean, there's no explanation for Samson being used by God other than God is merciful and gracious. And so we can have our own inner struggles, my friends. Don't beat yourself up. We can have our own inner struggles. But the grace of God says he still catches us up in his marvelous plan. By grace, he still catches us up in his grand story of redemption, and he still uses us to impart grace on others. And so hopefully this is an encouragement to us to not just find hope in the midst of our inner struggles, but to also pursue inner change when it comes to our inner struggles. See, it's one thing to say, yes, I have these inner struggles, but God gives me grace anyways, and thanks be to God. But it's another thing to say, God, because of your grace, I don't want to struggle with these inner struggles anymore. And so, God, help me with the inner change that I need so that I don't struggle with this lust of my eyes, this lust of my flesh anymore. Help me to pursue wisdom. Help me to pursue your wisdom. Help me to pursue godliness in all of my decision making. We saw the ripple effect today of one unwise choice. And we've talked a little bit about the things we could do to avoid the heartaches that come from our unwise choices. But at the end of the day, what we need most of all is a gracious God who changes us so that we could pursue his wisdom rather than what we think is right in our own eyes. And ultimately, that's the one thing that's going to save us from heartache in this lifetime. Amen, church?